The first shovel strike rang out sharp in the night, a dull clang against stone hidden beneath the soil. Cold earth gave way with a sound like a body tearing loose from roots. Damp rot rose on the wind, the smell of apples long fallen and left to sour where no one dared gather them. At the orchard's edge, the widow hummed, low, steady, tuneless. The lantern swayed, throwing wild shadows across the skeletal trees. Something beneath the mound shifted, muffled and frantic. A cough, a cry? Her humming deepened, drowning it out. Dirt rained down, quick and heavy as though she had done this many times before. The night swallowed the orchard whole, but the ground refused to stay quiet. The orchard and the widow. The first shovel strike rang out sharp in the night, a dull clang against stone hidden beneath the soil. Cold earth gave way with a sound like a body tearing loose from roots. Damp rot rose on the wind, the smell of apples long fallen and left to sour where no one dared gather them. At the orchard's edge, the widow hummed, low, steady, tuneless. The lantern swayed, throwing wild shadows across the skeletal trees. Something beneath the mound shifted, muffled and frantic. A cough, a cry? Her humming deepened, drowning it out. Dirt rained down, quick and heavy as though she had done this many times before. The night swallowed the orchard whole, but the ground refused to stay quiet. The orchard silenced by day. Margaret Hale's orchard looked like any other patch of New England soil. Rows of apple trees bowing with fruit, branches heavy enough to groan in autumn wind. But the townsfolk swore the place was wrong. Not cursed exactly. Curses were easy to pin down. Neat little labels that soothed fearful minds. No, Margaret's orchard was off. The way milk soured faster when set too close to fruit from her trees. The way dogs refused to step past the wooden gate, hackles bristling as if they sensed something buried in the roots. Children dared each other to snatch apples from the lowest branches. They always came back pale and tight-lipped, refusing to say what they'd heard when the wind rushed through the trees. Some claimed the orchard whispered names. Others said they felt the ground shift underfoot, soft as a grave not yet settled. No one admitted aloud that Margaret's husbands, 3 of them, each gone without trace, had all walked into her orchard at night and never walked out again. Margaret Hale. Margaret was a peculiar sort of widow, not shrunken by grief the way women were expected to be, but sharpened by it. She carried herself with a quietness that unsettled men at the tavern and made women clutch rosaries tighter. Her first husband, Daniel, had been a merchant, brisk and broad, fond of the bottle. He vanished one October evening on the way home from market. His cart turned up at the roadside. The horse reins loose as if waiting for its master to return. The second, Charles, had been a farmer's son. He disappeared in spring just after the thaw, when the ground was soft enough to turn. He was last seen walking the orchard rows with Margaret at dusk, lantern in hand. Her third, Elias, a quiet schoolteacher. One stormy night, lightning lit the orchard and a neighbor swore he saw 2 figures digging under the trees. One vanished. Margaret carried on alone. Each time Margaret wept appropriately. Each time she wore black, then gray, then color again. She baked pies for funerals, carried baskets of fruit to church, sat in the front pew with her hands folded just so. Each time the orchard grew heavier with apples, sweeter than the year before. Whispers in the town. The town of Brindleford was small enough that secrets never stayed buried. Or perhaps more accurately, they never should have. People whispered of Margaret as they traded at the butcher, as they drew water from the well. "She's too calm, that one," said Mrs. Pritchard, shaking her head. 3 men gone and not a tear left on her cheek. "She's a woman cursed," muttered another. "Or a woman who curses," said a third. Quieter still. Constable Harrow, broad-shouldered and slow to anger, heard every word though none were spoken to his face. He had watched Margaret carefully since Elias vanished. Watched the lanterns flicker in her orchard long past midnight. Watched her shovel resting against the fence each morning, soil clinging to its blade. He was a man of law, but also a man of the town. And men of the town sometimes turned a blind eye if it meant keeping the peace. Still, he could not ignore the sound that reached his ears one night in late October. The sound in the Windit was near midnight when Harrow sat by his window, pipe smoke curling through the dark. The wind carried with it the ripe sour tang of fallen apples. It carried something else too, a sound faint but distinct. A scream, not the sharp cry of a fox nor the shrill wail of owls at war. This was human, choked, muffled, cut off mid-breath. Harrow set down his pipe, pulled his coat about his shoulders, and stepped into the night. The scream had carried from the direction of Margaret Hale's orchard. The moon was a thin sickle, the orchard little more than jagged silhouettes against the horizon. He walked slowly, careful to keep to the road, his boots crunching frost-bitten leaves. Each step closer, the orchard seemed to hum, not with sound exactly, but with weight, as though the air thickened the nearer he drew. Then he heard it again. Not a scream this time, but a pounding. A steady, frantic rhythm, like fists beating from beneath. Margaret's lantern at the orchard's edge, he stopped. A lantern swung among the trees, its light cutting wild arcs through the dark. Margaret's figure bent and rose, shovel-biting earth. Each strike carried with it that dull clang, that tearing sound of roots pulled free. "Mrs. Hale," Harrow called, voice tight. The lantern stilled. The shovel paused mid-strike. Margaret's head turned slowly, too slowly, until her face caught the weak lantern light. Her eyes gleamed, pale as glass, unblinking. "Constable," she said, her voice as calm as if he'd interrupted her baking at midday. "You should not be here." The ground behind her shuddered, the soil shifting as though something beneath strained upward. Harrow's hand went to the pistol at his belt, though some part of him knew iron and powder would not stop whatever pushed from beneath. "Step away from the mound." "Margaret," he said, though his voice cracked on her name, she only smiled. The soil split. A pale hand thrust upward through the dirt, clawing for air. Fingers twisted, filthy nails catching moonlight. Harrow staggered back, heart slamming in his chest. Margaret didn't flinch. Instead, she raised the shovel high above her shoulder and brought it down with a force that made the earth itself seem to cry out. The lantern toppled, flame sputtering in the cold grass, as the orchard roared with 100 whispering voices rising all at once. Darkness swallowed the scene, except for that hand, still twitching in the half-buried mound. Seeds of suspicion, the morning after. By dawn, the orchard looked as though nothing had happened. The lantern was gone, the grass wet with dew, the soil tamped neat and hard as if no hand had broken it. But Constable Harrow could not shake the image. That pale hand straining from beneath the earth, Margaret's shovel crashing down, the voices whispering through the trees. He had staggered home in the dark, certain the orchard would follow him, certain the whispers clung to his coat like smoke. Now, in the daylight, the town bustled as though untouched. Children fetched water, wives kneaded dough, men set out for fields and workshops. The air smelled of yeast, of wood smoke, of horses sweating at the bit. Ordinary life, and yet, people glanced more often at the Hale orchard. Glanced, then quickly away. Questions at the tavern that evening. Harrow found himself at the tavern, nursing ale he hardly tasted. The men around him spoke of livestock, of prices, of weather patterns. But when conversation lulled, someone always muttered Margaret's name. "3 men gone," said Jeb, the blacksmith, his hands rough as iron. If it were anyone else, she'd have been hauled in long ago. "She's a woman alone," another said, softer. "A widow 3 times over. Folk pity her." "Pity don't bring men back," Jeb spat. Harrow kept silent. He had sworn to uphold law, but law demanded evidence, and what he had seen in that orchard was not evidence. It was madness. Who would believe him if he said the ground had split open, that a hand had clawed from beneath, that whispers had risen from the trees? Still, he could not let it rest. Margaret's composure. 2 days later, Harrow walked the narrow lane to Margaret's cottage. She stood on her porch, apron tied neat, a basket of apples at her feet. Her face, pale and fine-boned, was calm as still water. "Constable," she greeted, as though she had not been caught digging in her orchard at midnight. "Mrs. Hale," he said, touching his hat. "Might I ask you some questions?" "Of course." She gestured toward the basket. "Take one. They're sweet this year." He hesitated, then shook his head. The apples gleamed too red, as though painted. "I've had reports," Harrow began carefully, "of strange sounds from your orchard. Screams in the night, digging." Margaret tilted her head, eyes narrowing just slightly. "Strange how grief echoes, Constable. Perhaps the town hears what it wishes to hear." "And the digging?" "I tend my soil." "Do you not dig your garden?" Her calm unnerved him more than anger would have. Her voice carried no tremor. Her gaze never wavered. Behind her, through the window, Harrow glimpsed a row of jars on the shelf, filled with what looked like soil but darker, thicker, clotted with something that glistened when the light caught it. The grave-shaped mound that night, Harrow could not sleep. His dreams were full of earth closing over his face, his lungs filled with soil. By morning, he resolved to act. He walked into the orchard. It was a cold gray dawn, mist pooling low between the rows. The apples above seemed to drip with dew, though when he touched one, his fingertips came away sticky, as though brushed with sap. Near the center of the orchard, he found it, a mound of earth, long, narrow, shaped like a grave. The soil was fresh-turned, darker than the rest. Harrow's heart pounded. He crouched, pressing his hand to the mound. The earth was still warm. And then, knock, knock, knock. The sound came from beneath. 3 sharp strikes, desperate and hollow like knuckles against wood. Harrow leapt back, breath tearing from his lungs. The mound shifted, earth quivering, then came the muffled voice, choked, pleading, "Help me!" The orchard responds. The trees stirred, though no wind blew. Branches creaked, groaned, reached. Apples fell in slow, deliberate thuds. "Help me," the voice begged again. Harrow's hand went to his pistol, though it was useless here. He staggered forward, fumbling for his knife, ready to dig. But before he could break the soil, a new sound rose. A low hum. Margaret's hum. That same tuneless song. She stood at the far end of the orchard, lantern in hand, though morning light had already broken. "Constable," she called, voice soft but carrying. "You trespass." The mound went still. The voice cut off, choked mid-cry. Harrow froze, knife in hand, heart hammering. Margaret walked closer, humming louder now as though soothing a child. Her eyes gleamed. "You mustn't dig where you do not sow," she said. "The orchard does not forgive thieves." And then, as if on cue, the trees shivered. 100 apples loosed all at once, striking the ground in unison with a sound like bones snapping. Misdirection. The cursed orchard. The following Sunday, whispers filled the church pews. Some said Margaret had cursed the orchard through witchcraft, that her husbands were claimed by it, not by her. Others muttered of old land deeds, of families before the Hales who had vanished too. "Maybe it's the ground itself," Mrs. Pritchard whispered. "Too much blood spilled on it, and now it takes more." The preacher's sermon that morning rang hollow. Every head turned when Margaret entered, basket of apples in her hands, veil neat over her brow. She sat in the front pew, lips moving in silent prayer, while behind her the congregation shifted uneasily. No one dared eat her apples anymore. Yet every doorstep found one, gleaming as if left by unseen hands. Harrow's doubt Harrow tried to reason it through. Perhaps he dreamed the knocking. Perhaps the orchard played tricks. Yet the memory of that muffled voice clung to him. He began digging into the town's records, old maps, old deeds. He found that the orchard land had once belonged to the Whitlock family. They too had vanished generations ago, their farm left untended until Margaret's first husband purchased it. In the margins of one record, in faded ink, was a single note: "The ground does not keep the dead." That night, unable to resist, Harrow returned. He carried his lantern, his pistol, his knife. The orchard loomed, branches skeletal against a sliver moon. He walked straight to the mound. The soil looked undisturbed, as though no hand had pressed against it. Still he knelt, ear to the earth, silence. Then, knock, knock, knock this time. It was not from beneath the mound. It was from directly behind him. He turned, lantern trembling in his hand, and saw a pale figure standing between the trees. Not Margaret, not any man he knew. Its mouth opened wide, soil spilling from its lips. "Dig," it rasped. Cracks in the facade. The pale figure Constable Harrow could not breathe. The figure before him was no living man nor wholly dead. Its skin hung loose, parchment white, its hair matted with earth. The mouth opened wider than any jaw should, spilling clods of black soil with each rasped word. "Dig." The lantern flame sputtered, shadows jerking across twisted branches. Harrow's hand went to his pistol, but his fingers froze. He could not lift it. The figure staggered one step closer. Roots dangled from its wrists like veins pulled loose, and then, just as suddenly, it was gone. No crack of branch. No shuffle of retreat. Only the orchard whispering, leaves hissing without wind. The mound at Harrow's feet remained still. He fled, the orchard's whispers chasing him all the way home. Margaret's dream that same night. Margaret dreamed. She was young again, hair bright, cheeks flushed with the bloom of first marriage. Daniel, her first husband, smiled at her from beneath the boughs. He held an apple in his palm, its skin a perfect red. "For you," he said. She reached for it, but when her fingers brushed the fruit, it burst. Worms, spilling out, writhing. Daniel's smile stretched, skin cracking. His eyes rolled back, and from his mouth came a sound not his own. A hum. Her hum. Margaret woke with a cry, sweat chilling her skin. The room smelled of damp soil, though the windows were latched tight. The orchard watches. She went to the orchard at dawn, shawl clutched tight against her. The trees loomed heavy with fruit. She felt their attention, the weight of it pressing down. "You're fed," she whispered, fed and satisfied, but the orchard groaned in reply. The branches swayed, though no breeze stirred. Apples dropped, striking the earth with dull thuds, rolling to her feet. One split on impact, spilling not seeds but something pale and hard. A tooth. Margaret staggered back, clutching her shawl. The orchard was never satisfied. The constable's visit Harrow came again the next day. Eyes dark from lack of sleep. "Mrs. Hale," he said stiffly, "I must ask you once more about your husbands." Margaret folded her hands. "They are gone. Taken by God, perhaps. Taken by the earth. You speak as if you know where they are." She tilted her head. "Where does the earth not take us, Constable? Every man goes into the ground," he bristled. "Not while still breathing." Her gaze flicked to him sharp. For the first time, a crack in her composure. Harrow leaned closer, voice low. "I've seen things. Heard things. If there's truth you're hiding, it will come to light." Margaret's lips curved in a small smile. "Be careful digging for truth, Constable. You may not like what you unearth." Voices in the soil that night. Margaret could not sleep. She sat by her window, staring at the orchard, listening. The voices came faint at first, a murmur beneath the earth. Daniel, Charles, Elias, each calling her name, each begging, pleading, cursing. She pressed her hands over her ears, but the voices only grew louder, swelling through the floorboards, through her chest. "Feed us, join us, bury him." Her reflection in the glass wavered, eyes hollow, lips cracked. She opened her mouth to scream, but what came out was a low hum. The orchard's hum. A town-divided word spread of Harrow's unease, though he said nothing outright. The town grew restless. Some wanted Margaret tried, hanged, her orchard burned. Others feared the orchard's curse would spread if touched. Children whispered of shapes among the trees. Men swore they heard digging late at night. No one dared walk the orchard road after sundown. Margaret became both pariah and phantom, greeted with stiff nods by day, whispered about by night. She carried on as though nothing had changed. Baked pies, tended soil, left apples at doorsteps. Her smile, faint and steady, never wavered, but her hands shook when no one was looking. The unripe apple one evening, Margaret found an apple fallen too soon. Its skin was pale, unripe, but pulsing faintly, as though something inside beat like a heart. She lifted it with trembling fingers. A crack split the skin. Inside, not flesh but something white, sharp, rows upon rows, teeth. The apple grinned at her, wide and impossible. Margaret dropped it, and it rolled to the orchard's edge, vanishing into the soil as if swallowed. Margaret's solitude, she began speaking aloud, not to herself, but to the trees. Her neighbors watched from afar, whispering. At night, she lit her lantern and walked the rows, whispering, humming, sometimes laughing, sometimes weeping. One boy swore he saw her kneeling in the dirt, pressing her ear to the ground as if listening to someone beneath. Another swore he saw a hand reach up to stroke her cheek, before sinking back into the soil. Harrow's resolve. Harrow could not rest. The image of that pale figure haunted him. He resolved to act alone. If need be, he would return to the orchard, dig the mound, find truth with his own hands. He gathered his tools, his lantern, his courage. Margaret stood among the trees that night, lantern swaying, shovel in hand. She felt the orchard breathing, alive beneath her feet. The soil shifted. A shape pushed upward, straining to surface. This time, it was not one of her husbands, it was herself. Her own face, pale and dirt-streaked, eyes wide, mouth open in a silent scream, clawing its way out of the ground. The lantern guttered. The orchard roared. Margaret dropped the shovel, staring at her own hand clawing from the earth. Isolation and chaos. The doppelganger in the soil. Margaret did not sleep for 3 nights after she saw herself clawing free of the orchard. She sat by her window, rocking, shawl pulled tight, whispering prayers that sounded more like bargains. The orchard gave no sign. No corpse of herself lay waiting. No hole marked where the soil had split, yet every time she shut her eyes, she felt fingers on her ankle, tugging, pulling her down. The orchard wanted more. Brindleford phrase. The town of Brindleford began to unravel. Men argued in the tavern over what to do. Some swore Margaret was a witch who had cursed the land, and that the orchard should be burned. Others whispered that to harm the orchard was to invite ruin, that the soil was too hungry, too old. Children were kept indoors. Dogs barked and whined at night, staring toward the orchard, refusing to be silenced. One dawn, a family awoke to find a row of apples laid neatly across their doorstep, each apple carved with a name. Each name belonging to a living member of the household. The townsfolk began to lock their doors and avoid one another's eyes. Harrow's discovery. Constable Harrow grew reckless with lack of sleep. He told no one where he went, but he returned to the orchard night after night. One evening he noticed something odd about Margaret's cottage. The back door, usually bolted, stood ajar. A draft carried the smell of damp soil, stronger than any cellar should. Lantern in hand, pistol drawn, he stepped inside. The kitchen was neat, untouched, shelves lined with jars of preserves and dark soil, but the floorboards near the hearth bore scratches long and jagged, as though something had been dragged across them again and again. He pushed the hearthstone aside and found a hatch. A stairway led down. The cellar beneath. The air below was wet, heavy, close. The walls glistened with moisture. Roots jutted out like grasping fingers. Harrow lifted his lantern higher. The cellar was no ordinary cellar. It stretched farther than the house above, tunnels branching lined with shelves. Shelves holding things that did not belong. A boot cracked and worn. A book of psalms. A pocket watch. A pair of spectacles, lenses clouded with dirt. He recognized them all. They had belonged to Margaret's husbands. He stepped closer. Beneath the shelves, in shallow pits dug into the earth, lay shapes. Bundled. Wrapped. The lantern light caught pale knuckles protruding from the soil, clutching nothing. And above, along the beams were marks like tally lines. Dozens of them, not 3, not 4, dozens. Margaret's spiral upstairs, Margaret hummed. She stood in the orchard with her lantern, eyes vacant, voice low. The trees leaned toward her as though listening. "You promised," she whispered. "You promised if I fed you, you would keep them quiet. But they call to me. They claw at me. What more do you want?" The orchard groaned. Apples fell in a rain around her, striking her shoulders, her head. She dropped to her knees, clutching the soil. "Take me instead," she begged. "End it." The ground shifted. Roots coiled around her wrists, tugging her down. She screamed, then began to laugh. The orchard did not want her end. It wanted her hand, her work. Her shovel. The town breaks. The next day, Brindleford split open in argument. In the square, men shouted, "Burn it down!" while others hissed, "You'll damn us all." The preacher called for prayer, but his voice was drowned by shouts. A stone was thrown, striking a man's temple. Blood spilled. The crowd scattered. That night, 3 men took torches to the orchard's edge. They hurled fire into the branches. The flames sputtered, died. The orchard stood untouched. By morning, the men were gone. In their place, 3 mounds of fresh earth nestled beneath the trees. Harrow confronts Margaret. Harrow confronted Margaret at dawn. "I've seen your cellar," he said, voice ragged. Her smile did not falter. "Then you know what must be done. You've murdered them." "I've fed them," she said sharply. "Fed the orchard, fed the soil, fed what lies beneath. Would you rather it go hungry?" Harrow's hand went to his pistol. "No more, Margaret." She stepped closer, eyes fever bright. "Then take my place, Constable. The orchard is never sated. If not me, then you. If not you, then all of them." Her voice broke into laughter, or sobbing. Harrow could not tell which. The husband returns that night, the ground trembled. The orchard moaned, trees rattling though no wind blew. A hand clawed free of the soil, then an arm, then a man's face pale and streaked with rot. Elias, Margaret's 3rd husband, dragged himself from the earth. His eyes were clouded, but they fixed on her. "Margaret," he whispered. His voice was wet with soil. "Why?" She staggered back, lantern swinging. "I gave you life," she cried. "I gave you purpose. I kept you here with me." He crawled closer, fingers leaving grooves in the dirt. "You buried me alive." The orchard groaned. Elias's mouth opened wider than humanly possible. soil spilling out. His voice deepened, layered with others. We are hungry. The ground beneath Margaret split wide. Roots lashed upward, wrapping her ankles, her wrists. She screamed as she was dragged toward the open pit. Elias lunged forward, soil pouring from his eyes, his mouth. His hands seized her shoulders, dragging her down with him. Harrow, watching from the edge of the orchard, raised his pistol. But before he could fire, the earth swallowed them both. The soil sealed shut, and the orchard sighed in satisfaction. The irreversible act, the silence. After, for 2 days, Margaret was not seen. Her cottage stood empty, her porch swept clean, her baskets of apples untouched. The orchard, however, bore signs. The soil around the trees was freshly turned. Apples fell in heaps, far more than the branches could hold. They lay in piles at the edge of the road, split and rotting, yet no one dared move them. The townsfolk whispered. Some believed Margaret dead, claimed they had seen the earth swallow her whole. Others muttered that she had gone deeper than death, that the orchard had claimed her as its own. Constable Harrow knew better. She was still there. Somewhere beneath, the buried husband speaks. The third night Harrow returned. He could not help himself. The orchard called to him, its whispers gnawing at his sanity. He stood where the ground had swallowed Margaret and Elias. The soil there was smooth now, tamped flat, but when he knelt and pressed his ear to it, he heard them, Margaret's voice, Elias's voice. Dozens more, layered and twisting. Feed us, they whispered. Feed us or be fed. The sound rattled his teeth, filled his skull. He staggered back, clutching his head. The orchard was no longer taking lives in silence. It was speaking directly. Margaret's return at dawn, the townsfolk gasped to see Margaret walking the road again. Pale, hollow-eyed, shawl drawn tight. Mrs. Hale, someone whispered. We thought you gone. She smiled faintly. I am. Her eyes looked strange, clouded not with blindness but with something like soil. She moved slower as though the ground weighed her down. Still she carried a basket. Apples gleamed within, too red, too ripe. She left one on every doorstep. No one dared touch them. But by nightfall, every apple was gone. The confession. That evening, Harrow confronted her in the orchard. Tell me the truth, he demanded. All of it. Margaret looked at him with eyes that did not blink. The orchard began long before me. Long before my husband's. The land remembers blood, Constable. It drinks it. And once it tastes, it never forgets. Then why bury them alive? His voice cracked. Why not after? Her smile was sharp. Because the orchard will not feed on the dead. It wants their fear, their breath. Their last heartbeat pounding in the dark. Harrow recoiled. You chose them. You buried them. I saved you all, she hissed. Without me, the orchard would take the town. Children first, then mothers, then you. Her hands trembled, clutching the lantern. It spoke to me. It told me what it needed. I only obeyed. Elias's horror, the ground behind her split. Elias clawed his way upward again, half-buried, soil dripping from his hair, his eyes milky with rot. Liar, he rasped. You did not obey. You chose. His voice deepened, layered with countless others. She feeds us because she loves the orchard more than any man. She loves it more than life. Margaret screamed, covering her ears. No! Harrow stood frozen, pistol shaking in his hand. The orchard shook. Apples rained down like hail. Branches twisted, roots lashed from the soil. The final bargain, Margaret dropped to her knees. Take me, she cried. Take me instead. But the orchard groaned, heavy and low. The roots tightened around her ankles, dragging her toward the pit. No, the voices hissed. Not you, not yet. You are our hands. The roots shifted, slithering toward Harrow instead. He fired his pistol, shot after shot. Bullets tore through branches, but the orchard did not bleed. The roots coiled around his legs, pulling him down. Margaret watched, tears streaking her soil-stained face. It must be done, she whispered. One more. One last offering. Harrow's eyes locked on hers. You'll kill me, she did not answer. The pit opens. The ground split wide at their feet. Darkness gaped below, deeper than any grave, deeper than the roots of the oldest tree. From within rose a stench of rot and something sweet, like fruit left too long in the sun. Hands reached up. Dozens. Pale, grasping, clawing. Husbands, neighbors, strangers. All of them writhing, pulling. Margaret raised the shovel. Her arms shook, her breath ragged. Forgive me, she whispered. The shovel came down. Harrow screamed as the earth swallowed him, roots tightening, hands dragging. His lantern fell, its light vanishing into the pit. Margaret stood above, shovel slick with soil, tears on her cheeks. The voices below roared with satisfaction, and then, slowly one voice rose above the others. Not Daniel, not Charles, not Elias. Harrow's voice had called her name. Margaret. The orchard trembled, branches stretching higher, apples splitting open with wet pops. From each one spilled not seeds, not worms and but wedding rings, hundreds of them. They clinked against the soil, against one another, as if the orchard had been waiting to reveal its true count all along. Margaret fell to her knees, clutching her head as the orchard screamed with voices too many to name. The final twist, the aftermath of the pit when morning broke, Brindleford was silent. The square was empty, shutters barred, doors bolted. Not a soul stirred, but from the orchard a smell rose, thick, sweet, cloying. Apples split on the branches, their skins cracking, dripping syrup as dark as blood. The ground was littered with rings glinting like fallen teeth. Margaret stood among them, her shawl torn, her face streaked with dirt and tears. She clutched the shovel to her chest like a crucifix. The pit had closed. Harrow was gone. His voice, however, still whispered through the roots. Margaret. It followed her with every step. The town's abandonment. Within the week, families began to flee. Wagons rolled out at dawn. Children clutched to their mothers' skirts, men glancing back with wide eyes. Some left food behind, possessions, even livestock. Better poor in another town than buried rich in Brindleford. The preacher nailed the church doors shut. The tavern stood abandoned, tankards still half full. By winter's first frost, Brindleford was empty. Empty but for one. Margaret remained. Margaret and the orchard. She walked the rows in silence. No longer did she hum. The orchard hummed for her, low and constant like breath against her ear. Sometimes the voices rose clear. Daniel's anger, Charles's weeping, Elias's bitterness, Harrow's pleading. Other times they tangled together, 1,000 cries at once. Margaret learned to answer without speaking. She set her shovel to the soil and the voices quieted. Every few weeks a traveler would pass the road, lost or desperate. Margaret would wave them in, offer apples, a place by her fire. Few left by morning. The orchard always asked, and Margaret always answered. The truth of the curse. In the dead of one winter night, as snow drifted thick, Margaret stood at the orchard's heart. The trees loomed black against the white, their branches skeletal, fruit gleaming red like wounds. The voices rose louder than ever before. We are not yours. Margaret fell to her knees, clutching her ears. I fed you. I kept you. You belong to me. No, the orchard roared. The sound came not from branches but from beneath, a chorus of earth itself. You belong to us, she screamed as roots burst from the ground, wrapping her legs, her arms. The soil split wide, and from the pit rose not her husband's, not Harrow, but herself. Dozens of her, faces pale, hair streaked with soil, eyes hollow. Each Margaret clawed from the earth, whispering, humming, laughing. You are not the first, they whispered. You will not be the last, the final planting. The orchard opened wide. Margaret struggled, clawing at the soil, her nails breaking, her voice breaking. But the roots dragged her down. Her shovel clattered from her grip. Not me, she wept. Please, not me. The orchard did not answer. It swallowed her whole. The pit sealed shut. And for the first time in years, the orchard was silent. Years later, Brindleford was long abandoned. The cottages sagged, roofs caved, windows broken. Ivy crept over stone, rats scurried where children once played. Travelers told stories of the place. Of a town that vanished overnight. Of an orchard that grew too sweet, too red, too ripe. No one dared enter. And yet some nights, under a sickle moon, a lantern could be seen swinging among the trees. A faint hum carried on the wind, low and tuneless. Children in neighboring villages whispered dares. Eat an apple from the hail orchard, and you would hear the widow's voice in your dreams. Eat two and you would never wake. The final echo one autumn, a boy dared too far. He crept through the orchard, heart hammering, and plucked a single apple. When he bit it, the fruit split wide. Inside was not flesh, not seed, not worm. Inside was a ring, a simple gold band. Still warm. The boy dropped it, but before it hit the ground, the orchard sighed. and from the soil came a single whisper, soft and patient. "Margaret." The boy fled, but the orchard had already begun to grow again. Closing beat, the widow was gone. Or perhaps she was never gone at all. The orchard does not keep the dead, it keeps the living, and it always remembers the ones who fed it.